The stagecoach wheels kicked up dust as Katherine Morgan stepped down onto the sun-baked streets of Pueblo, Colorado. Her silk dress, already wilting in the August heat of 1882. And she wondered if accepting a mail-order bride arrangement had been the worst mistake of her 22 years of life. The telegram from Walter Jenkins had been brief and businesslike, much like the 3 letters that preceded it. He needed a wife. She needed an escape from Philadelphia society that had shunned her after her father's bank collapsed, leaving creditors circling like vultures and her mother in a sanatorium from the shame of it all. Marriage to a stranger ranching cattle in Colorado seemed preferable to becoming a governess to spoiled children of the very people who once called her friend. Katherine clutched her carpetbag tighter as her eyes scanned the dusty Main Street. False-fronted buildings lined either side, their weathered wood a far cry from the brick and marble of home. Men in dusty boots and wide-brimmed hats eyed her curiously as they passed. She felt exposed, alone, and terrified. "Miss Morgan." A deep voice spoke behind her, and Katherine spun around. The man standing before her was tall, easily over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the afternoon sun. His hair was dark brown, almost black where sweat dampened it beneath his hat. His face was weathered and tanned, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into bright sunlight. Those eyes were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds over the prairie. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, and despite the dust on his clothes and the weariness in his stance, there was something undeniably handsome about him. "I am Katherine Morgan," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Mr. Jenkins." "Walter Jenkins, yes, madam." He removed his hat, revealing more of that dark hair. "I hope your journey was not too difficult." His voice was quieter than she expected, almost gentle, not the gruff bark she had anticipated from a cattle rancher. Katherine found herself relaxing slightly. "It was long," she admitted. "But I am here now." An awkward silence stretched between them. Walter shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly as uncomfortable as she was. Finally, he gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby. "I have supplies to pick up from the general store, then we can head to the ranch. It is about an hour's ride from town." He paused, then added, "Unless you would prefer to stay in town tonight. There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson. She is respectable. You could rest and we could make the journey tomorrow." Katherine considered this. Part of her desperately wanted to delay the inevitable, to have one more night before her life irrevocably changed. But another part of her, the part that had survived the past year of whispers and closed doors and pitying looks, knew that delaying would only make things harder. "I would prefer to go today, if it does not inconvenience you," she said. Something that might have been relief flickered across Walter's face. "No inconvenience at all. Let me get your trunk." As Walter hefted her heavy trunk onto the wagon bed with surprising ease, Katherine studied him more carefully. His hands were rough and calloused, his movements economical and practiced. This was a man who worked hard for his living. His clothes, while clean, were worn and mended in places. She wondered what kind of life awaited her on his ranch. The general store was dim and cool after the brightness outside. Walter moved through it with purpose, collecting flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples. Katherine noticed he seemed to be buying more than usual, perhaps in anticipation of feeding 2 instead of 1. "Walter Jenkins, is that you?" An older woman with iron-gray hair emerged from the back room. Her sharp eyes immediately found Katherine. "And who might this be, Mrs. Patterson?" "This is Miss Katherine Morgan from Philadelphia." Walter's voice was carefully neutral. "She is going to be my wife." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Your wife? Well, I declare, I did not know you were courting anyone, Walter." "We have been corresponding," Katherine said, lifting her chin slightly. She had dealt with enough gossips in Philadelphia to recognize one here, corresponding. Mrs. Patterson repeated the word as if tasting it, then her expression softened slightly. "Well then, congratulations are in order." "When is the wedding?" "We are going to see Reverend Matthews this Sunday," Walter said. He glanced at Katherine. "If that suits you, Miss Morgan." "That would be acceptable," Katherine replied, though her heart hammered at how quickly everything was moving. Mrs. Patterson insisted on adding a jar of her preserves to their supplies as a wedding gift. And by the time they left the store, Katherine suspected the entire town would know about Walter Jenkins's bride before nightfall. The ride out to the ranch was quiet at first. The wagon rattled along a well-worn dirt road that cut through endless prairie. Grass stretched in every direction, golden in the late summer heat, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings and the dark shapes of cattle in the distance. Mountains rose to the west, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the season. "It is beautiful," Katherine said softly, and she meant it. There was something stark and honest about this landscape, so different from the manicured parks and crowded streets of Philadelphia. Walter glanced at her, surprise evident on his face. "You think so? Most people from back east find it too empty." "I think I have had enough of crowded places for a while," Katherine said. He did not ask her to explain, and she was grateful for that. Instead, he began pointing out landmarks. The creek where his property started, the stand of cottonwoods where he often saw deer in the mornings, the ridge where you could see for miles on a clear day. "How long have you been ranching here?" Katherine asked. 5 years. "I bought the land with money I saved working as a ranch hand for other outfits. Started with 50 head of cattle. Now I have nearly 200. There was quiet pride in his voice. "It is not a big operation, but it is mine. Well, ours, I suppose, once we are married." Katherine felt a flutter in her chest at the word ours. This was real. This was happening. In less than a week, she would be Mrs. Walter Jenkins, wife to a cattle rancher in Colorado. "I should tell you," Walter said, his voice hesitant, "the house is not fancy. It is just a simple ranch house. 2 rooms, though I have been building an addition. I thought you might want more space." "I am sure it will be fine," Katherine said, though anxiety crept up her spine. 2 rooms. She had grown up in a house with 12. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise. It was indeed simple. A low wooden structure with a peaked roof and a narrow porch across the front. Behind it stood a barn and several outbuildings. A split-rail fence enclosed a corral where several horses stood in the shade of a lean-to shelter. It looked lonely out here, isolated, with the nearest neighbor probably miles away. Walter helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady on her waist. For a moment, they stood close enough that Katherine could smell sun-warmed cotton and leather and something else, something earthy and masculine that was not entirely unpleasant. "Welcome home," Walter said, then seemed to realize how presumptuous that sounded. "That is, I hope you will come to think of it as home." Katherine looked at the modest house, at the vast expanse of prairie beyond it, at this quiet man who watched her with such careful hope in his storm-cloud eyes. She thought of the grand house in Philadelphia that was no longer hers, of the life she had lost, of the uncertain future that lay ahead. "I hope so too," she said. The inside of the house was dim and cooler than outside. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a cast-iron stove in one corner, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a pair of worn armchairs near the fireplace. Everything was clean but spare, utilitarian rather than decorative. Through an open doorway, Katherine could see into the bedroom where a single bed frame dominated the small space, one bed. The reality of what she had agreed to hit Katherine with sudden force. She would be sleeping in that bed, with Walter. She swallowed hard, her face growing warm. "I can sleep out here on the floor until after the wedding," Walter said quickly, clearly seeing her discomfort. "I should have mentioned that in the letters. I did not mean to presume. You will have the bedroom to yourself until we are properly married." Relief flooded through Katherine, followed immediately by gratitude toward this man who seemed to understand her unspoken fears. "Thank you," she managed. Walter brought in her trunk and set it at the foot of the bed. "I need to tend to the horses and check on the cattle before dark. There is water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. I will be back in an hour or so." He paused at the doorway. "Are you hungry? I could make something before I go." "I can manage," Katherine said, then realized she had no idea what she would make. She had never prepared a meal in her life. In Philadelphia, they had always had a cook, even after the money troubles started. Walter nodded and left, his boots thudding on the wooden porch. Through the window, Katherine watched him stride toward the barn, moving with the easy confidence of a man on his own land. She turned to survey the kitchen area. The stove looked complicated and intimidating. There were pots hanging on the wall, a few dishes on a shelf, some foodstuffs in barrels and jars. Katherine had no idea where to begin. An hour later, Walter returned to find Katherine sitting at the table, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Miss Morgan, what is wrong?" Katherine took a shaky breath. She could lie, could pretend everything was fine, could put off this humiliation a little longer. But what would be the point? He would discover the truth eventually. "I confessed I have never cooked before," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Not a single meal. We always had a cook. I do not even know how to light that stove. I do not know what to do with flour and eggs and all those things you bought. I am sorry. I know you expected someone capable and useful, and instead you got me, and I do not even know how to feed us." The silence that followed felt eternal. Katherine forced herself to look at Walter, expecting disappointment, perhaps anger. Instead, his expression was thoughtful. He pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her. "I have been ranching alone for 5 years," he said slowly. "I can cook enough to keep from starving, but not much more than that. Beans, bacon, sometimes a steak if I am feeling ambitious, biscuits that could double as horseshoes." A small smile touched his lips. "I am not exactly a chef myself, but at least you know the basics," Katherine said miserably. "Then we will learn together every day," Walter said simply. The words were quiet but firm, holding a promise. "Neither of us needs to be perfect at this. We will figure it out as we go." Katherine stared at him. "You are not angry. Why would I be angry? You never pretended to be something you are not. Your letters said you were educated, cultured, but you never claimed to be a homesteader. I knew you were coming from a different life." He stood and moved to the stove. "Come here. I will show you what I know, which is not much, but it is a start." Katherine rose on unsteady legs and joined him. Walter opened the stove and showed her how to arrange kindling and paper, how to light it, and gradually add larger pieces of wood. He explained how the heat could be controlled by adjusting the damper. His voice was patient, his movements slow enough for her to follow. "Now, for tonight, we will keep it simple. Can you slice bread?" "I think so." Walter produced a loaf and a knife. "I buy bread from Mrs. Patterson when I go to town. Easier than making it myself. Slice it thick." While Katherine carefully cut the bread, concentrating fiercely on making even slices, Walter retrieved bacon from the cold box on the porch and began laying strips in a large iron skillet. Soon the house filled with the salty, savory smell of frying meat. "We can fry some eggs too," Walter said. Do you know how to crack an egg? I have seen it done, Katherine said uncertainly. Give it a try. She picked up an egg from the bowl on the counter, studying it. She tapped it against the edge of the pan as she had seen the cook do countless times. Too hard. The egg exploded, shell and all falling into the bacon grease. That is all right, Walter said calmly. He fished out the shell pieces with a spoon. Try again, but gentler this time. The second egg went better. The third was almost perfect. By the fourth, Katherine felt a small surge of pride as the golden yolk settled intact in the pan. There, you see, you are learning already. Walter used a fork to flip the bacon. Tomorrow we will try something else, day by day, meal by meal. Before you know it, you will be cooking without thinking about it. They ate their simple supper as the sun set outside, painting the prairie in shades of orange and gold. The bacon was a little burnt. The eggs were uneven. But Katherine had helped make it, and there was something satisfying about that. Tell me about your ranch, Katherine said as they ate. What is a typical day like? Walter leaned back in his chair. I am up before dawn most days. Check on the cattle, make sure none strayed during the night. Repair fences, which is never-ending work. This time of year, I am cutting and stacking hay for winter. Sometimes I ride into town for supplies or to sell cattle. It is hard work and it is lonely. The admission hung in the air between them. Is that why you advertised for a wife? Katherine asked softly. Walter met her eyes. Partly. I am 28 years old and I have spent the last 5 years building something I am proud of. But coming back to an empty house every night, eating alone, talking to horses because there is no one else to talk to. He shook his head. That is no kind of life. I want a partner, someone to share this with, maybe children someday if God wills it. Katherine thought of her own loneliness in Philadelphia, the friends who abandoned her when her father's bank failed, the young men who had courted her suddenly disappearing when the money was gone, her mother, lost in her own grief and shame, barely recognizing Katherine anymore. I understand loneliness, she said quietly. Perhaps better than you know. Walter reached across the table, hesitating just before touching her hand. Katherine made the decision for both of them, closing the distance and letting his rough, warm palm cover her smaller hand. They sat like that for a long moment, two lonely people reaching for connection in the gathering darkness. The days before the wedding passed in a strange, suspended way. Katherine rose early to find Walter already gone to his work, the stove still warm from his morning coffee. She would attempt breakfast on her own, sometimes successfully, often not. Walter never complained about burnt oatmeal or undercooked flapjacks. He ate what she made with patient determination, then showed her what might work better next time. They cooked dinner together each evening, a ritual that Katherine came to treasure. Walter would come in dusty and tired from his day's work, wash up at the basin on the porch, and then join her in the kitchen. He taught her how to judge when meat was done, how to make gravy, how to keep rice from scorching. She was not good at it yet, but she was improving. They talked while they cooked. Walter told her about his childhood in Kansas, the son of farmers who barely scratched out a living. About how he had left home at 16 to work on bigger ranches, learning the cattle business from the ground up. About the dream of having his own land that had driven him to save every penny for years. Katherine, in turn, found herself opening up about her life in Philadelphia. The lavish parties that now seemed frivolous. The pressure to marry well, which had been intense even before the scandal. Her father, who had been kind but weak, who had made poor investments and worse decisions, who had died of a heart attack 2 months after his bank collapsed, leaving Katherine and her mother with nothing but debts and shame. I do not miss the wealth, Katherine said one evening as they peeled potatoes together. That might sound strange, but I do not. I miss feeling safe. I miss having a place in the world. That is what the money represented, I suppose. Security. Belonging. I hope you will find that here, Walter said. It will not be an easy life. There are hard winters and dry summers and 1,000 things that can go wrong with cattle and crops. But it is honest work and the land is ours, and that means something. Katherine found herself looking forward to their evenings together with an anticipation that surprised her. Walter was not like the young men she had known in Philadelphia, who talked about themselves constantly and expected her to admire their accomplishments. He listened more than he spoke. He asked her opinions and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. He was kind in small, quiet ways that meant more than grand gestures ever had. On Friday, they made the journey back to town together to meet with Reverend Matthews. The Reverend was an older man with kind eyes and a warm handshake. He spoke with them in his small study next to the church, asking them questions about their expectations for marriage, their faith, their plans for the future. "I must ask," Reverend Matthews said gently, "have you two had enough time to truly know each other? I understand you have been corresponding, but that is not the same as living side by side day after day." "No, we have not had much time," Walter acknowledged. "But I know Miss Morgan is brave enough to travel halfway across the country to start a new life. I know she is willing to learn and to work hard. I know she is honest, because she could have hidden her inexperience with household tasks, but she told me the truth right away." He glanced at Katherine. "That is enough for me to build on." Katherine felt warmth spread through her chest. "And I know Mr. Jenkins is patient and kind. I know he works hard and cares for his land and animals. I know he treats me with respect and does not make me feel foolish for not knowing things I was never taught." "That is more than I hoped for." Reverend Matthews smiled. "Then I will be happy to marry you tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock, if that suits you both." They spent the night before the wedding at separate locations. Walter arranged for Katherine to stay at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, insisting it was proper that they spend their last night as unmarried people apart. Mrs. Patterson fussed over Katherine like a mother hen, pressing her for details about how she met Walter, what their courtship had been like, what her plans were for the ranch. Katherine answered as honestly as she could without revealing too much. Yes, they had corresponded. Yes, it had been brief. No, she was not frightened. Well, perhaps a little, but in a hopeful way. Mrs. Patterson had surprised Katherine by producing a dress, ivory-colored with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "It was my daughter's wedding dress," she explained. "She is married and living in Denver now, and she wrote to tell me I could do with it as I pleased. You are welcome to wear it tomorrow if you like. It might need a few adjustments, but I am handy with a needle." Katherine had nearly cried at the unexpected kindness. She tried on the dress, and with a few quick tucks and stitches, Mrs. Patterson had it fitting reasonably well. It was far simpler than the elaborate gown Katherine might have worn for a society wedding in Philadelphia, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. The wedding day dawned clear and hot. Katherine bathed and dressed with Mrs. Patterson's help, her hands trembling as she fastened the small pearl buttons at her wrists. This was real. This was happening. In a few hours, she would be married to a man she had known for less than a week. But when she arrived at the church and saw Walter waiting at the altar in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his hair still damp from washing, his face a mixture of nervousness and hope, something settled in Katherine's chest. This was right. Maybe not perfect, maybe not what she had once imagined for herself, but right nonetheless. The ceremony was simple. Mrs. Patterson and her husband served as witnesses. Reverend Matthews spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about partnership and faith and perseverance. Walter's hand was steady when he slipped the simple gold band on Catherine's finger, his voice clear as he spoke his vows. Catherine's own voice shook slightly, but she got through the words, promising to honor and cherish this man who was now her husband. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them man and wife, Walter leaned in to kiss her. It was brief and chaste, his lips warm against hers, but Catherine felt the promise in it, the commitment they had both just made. They had dinner at the town's only restaurant, a modest celebration with Mrs. Patterson and her husband. Then they made the ride back to the ranch, Catherine sitting close to Walter on the wagon seat, hyper-aware of his solid presence beside her, of the gold band on her finger catching the afternoon sunlight. The house looked the same as when they had left it that morning, but somehow different. This was her home now. Not her father's house, not a boarding house, but hers. Theirs. Walter helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. They stood in the yard, suddenly awkward with each other again despite the vows they had just exchanged. "I will tend to the horses," Walter said finally. "Take your time settling in." Catherine went inside and changed out of the wedding dress into one of her simpler day dresses. She carefully hung the wedding dress in the wardrobe, next to Walter's few spare shirts. The intimacy of their clothes hanging side by side made her breath catch. When Walter came back inside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. He had washed up at the pump outside, his hair dark with water. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Catherine," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. It sounded right in his quiet voice. "I want you to know there is no rush. We are married in the eyes of God and the law, and that is enough for now. Everything else can happen in its own time, when we are both ready." Catherine felt a rush of gratitude mixed with something else, something warmer and deeper. She crossed the room to stand in front of him, close enough to see the different shades of blue and gray in his eyes. "You are a good man, Walter Jenkins," she said softly. "I want to be a good husband to you," he replied. "I want you to be happy here." "I think I will be," Catherine said, and realized she meant it. That night they lay together in the bed that had seemed so intimidating just days ago, a respectable distance between them. Walter fell asleep quickly, exhausted from his day's work and the emotional weight of the wedding. Catherine lay awake longer, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the warmth radiating from his body. She thought about how much her life had changed in such a short time. 3 weeks ago, she had been in Philadelphia, desperate and alone. Now she was married, living in Colorado, learning to cook and keep house on a cattle ranch. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, Catherine realized something surprising. For the first time in a year, she felt a small spark of hope for the future. The following weeks fell into a rhythm. Catherine continued learning to manage the household with Walter's patient guidance. She mastered eggs and bacon, then moved on to more complicated dishes. She learned to make bread, her first few loaves emerging from the oven as dense as bricks, but gradually improving until Walter declared them the best biscuits he had ever tasted. She learned to fry chicken, to roast beef, to make stew that actually tasted good. But cooking was only part of her education. Walter taught her about the ranch, taking her with him on his morning rounds when the weather was good. He showed her how to check the cattle for signs of illness or injury, how to spot weak sections of fence before they broke, how to read the sky for coming weather. Catherine learned to ride astride instead of side saddle, which was far more practical for ranch work, even if it would have scandalized everyone she had known in Philadelphia. "You have a good seat," Walter said one morning as they rode back from checking on a small herd in the north pasture. Natural horsewoman, Katherine laughed. I am barely staying on, and you know it. You are doing better than I did when I first learned. I fell off so many times my first year that the other ranch hands started calling me Tumbles. He grinned at her, and Katherine felt her heart skip. He smiled so rarely that each one felt like a gift. They were becoming friends, Katherine realized. More than friends, really. Partners, just as Walter had wanted. They worked together, ate together, talked together in the evenings. Walter would read aloud from the week-old newspapers he bought in town, while Katherine mended clothes or worked on the embroidery sampler Mrs. Patterson had given her. Sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, Walter whittling small figures from pieces of wood, Katherine watching the sunset paint the prairie in brilliant colors. And slowly, carefully, they were becoming something more than partners. A touch that lingered a little longer. Walter's hand at the small of Katherine's back as he helped her over rough ground. Katherine smoothing Walter's collar before church on Sundays. Small kisses goodnight that grew slightly less brief, slightly less chaste. 2 months after their wedding, the first cold snap hit. Katherine woke to frost on the windows and Walter already up, building up the fire in the stove to warm the house. Winter comes early this far up, he said when Katherine emerged from the bedroom, wrapped in a shawl. We should be all right, though. I got the hay in before the cold hit, and the cattle are in good condition. They made breakfast together, as had become their habit. Katherine fried eggs while Walter made coffee and toasted bread. They moved around each other in the small kitchen with an ease born of practice, no longer bumping into each other or apologizing for getting in the way. I need to ride up to the North Ridge today, Walter said as they ate. Check on the cattle up there and make sure they have access to the creek. It might freeze over if this cold keeps up. I will come with you, Katherine said. Walter hesitated. It will be cold, and it is a long ride. I will bundle up, and I have been on long rides before. Katherine met his eyes. I want to help, Walter. I know I am not as capable as a ranch wife who grew up in this life, but I am learning. Let me help. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but wear your warmest clothes, and we take breaks if you get too cold. They saddled up after breakfast, Katherine on the gentle mare Walter had designated as hers, Walter on his larger gelding. The world was beautiful and harsh in the cold morning light, the grass stiff with frost, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. Their breath and the horse's breath rose in clouds. The ride to the North Ridge took 2 hours. Katherine's face felt numb despite the scarf wrapped around it, her fingers stiff even inside gloves. But she was determined not to complain, not to give Walter any reason to regret bringing her. They found the cattle clustered near a stand of rocks that provided some windbreak. Walter counted them carefully, scanning the herd with a practiced eye. Too short, he said, frowning. 2 of the yearlings are missing. They spent another hour searching, following tracks through the frost-stiff grass. They finally found the 2 missing cattle down in a small ravine. One had apparently fallen and injured its leg. The other had stayed with it, as cattle sometimes did. Walter assessed the situation grimly. The leg is not broken, but it is badly strained. She cannot make it back to the main herd on her own. What do we do? Katherine asked. We get her out of this ravine and closer to shelter. Then I will come back tomorrow with a wagon and supplies. She will need to be kept separate until that leg heals. He looked at Katherine. This is going to be difficult. Are you sure you are up for it? Tell me what to do, Katherine said simply. Together they worked to help the injured yearling out of the ravine. It was hard physical labor. Katherine pulled and pushed, using her weight and strength in ways she never had before. Her muscles burned. Sweat formed under her layers of clothing despite the cold. But gradually, with Walter's expertise and Katherine's determination, they managed to move both cattle to a more sheltered location near a creek that had not yet frozen. By the time they finished, the sun was past its peak. They were both exhausted, dirty, and cold. Walter looked at Katherine with something like wonder. "You did well today," he said. "Really well. A lot of women would have complained or given up." "I am not a lot of women," Katherine replied, then added more softly, "and this is my ranch too, my home. I want to take care of it." Something shifted in Walter's expression. He reached out and cupped her face in his rough hand, his thumb brushing across her cold cheek. "Katherine," he said, just her name, but the way he said it made her breath catch. He kissed her then, really kissed her. Not the brief goodnight kisses they had been exchanging, but something deeper, warmer, full of emotion too big for words. Katherine's arms went around his neck, pulling him closer. She felt his hands on her back, holding her tight against him, and something inside her seemed to open up like a flower to sunlight. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Walter's eyes were bright. "I think I am falling in love with you," he said. "I did not expect that. I hoped we would be partners, maybe friends. But this," he touched his chest over his heart, "this is more than I hoped for." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "You are nothing like I expected, Walter Jenkins. You are better." They rode back to the ranch house in the gathering dusk, riding close enough that their legs brushed, stealing glances at each other like young sweethearts. When they reached home, Walter tended to the horses while Katherine started dinner. But when he came inside, he pulled her away from the stove and back into his arms, kissing her until they were both dizzy with it. That night, the distance that had existed between them in their bed disappeared. Walter made love to his wife with tenderness and care, taking his time, making sure Katherine felt cherished and safe. Katherine had been nervous, having only the vaguest idea of what to expect, but Walter was patient, and there was affection in every touch, every kiss. When it was over, Katherine lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, and felt a bone-deep contentment she had never experienced before. "Are you all right?" Walter asked softly, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I am wonderful," Katherine said honestly. "I am exactly where I want to be." November arrived with the first real snow. Katherine woke to a world transformed, everything covered in white, the silence deep and profound. Walter was already up, checking to make sure the animals had survived the night safely. Katherine dressed quickly and started breakfast, the kitchen warm from the stove. They were snowed in for 3 days. Walter spent the time doing repairs inside the house, working on the addition he had mentioned when Katherine first arrived. Katherine cooked and cleaned and read and worked on sewing a shirt for Walter as a surprise. They played cards in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing. They made love in the afternoon warmth of their bedroom, learning each other's bodies, growing comfortable with intimacy. "I want to know everything about you," Walter said one evening as they lay tangled together. "Everything you think, everything you dream about, everything you are." "That might take a while," Katherine said with a smile. "We have the rest of our lives," Walter replied, kissing her shoulder. "I am not going anywhere." When the snow finally stopped and Walter could get outside again, Katherine helped him dig paths to the barn and other buildings. Her hands were soft compared to his, unused to this kind of labor, and she developed blisters despite the gloves. But she kept working, determined to pull her weight. Walter noticed the blisters when they came inside that evening. "You should have said something," he scolded gently, examining her reddened palms. "We could have taken breaks." "I am fine," Katherine insisted. "You are stubborn," Walter corrected, but there was affection in his voice. He carefully applied salve to her hands and wrapped them in soft cloth. These will toughen up eventually, but until then, we need to take care of them. You take care of me, Katherine said wonderingly. No one has done that before, not like this. You are my wife. Taking care of you is not a burden, it is a privilege. Walter raised her bandaged hand and kissed it gently. Just like you take care of me, we are in this together, remember. Christmas came, and Walter surprised Katherine by bringing home a small pine tree he had cut from the mountains. They decorated it with strings of popcorn and small ornaments carved from wood. Walter presented Katherine with a new coat, warmer and more practical than the one she had brought from Philadelphia. Katherine gave him the shirt she had been secretly sewing, which fit perfectly and made his eyes light up with pleasure. They made a feast together, roasting a chicken and making all the side dishes Katherine had been practicing. The biscuits were fluffy, the gravy was smooth, the vegetables were perfectly cooked. Walter declared it the best Christmas dinner he had ever eaten, and Katherine glowed with pride. Next year we will have to get a bigger bird, Walter said as they cleaned up. This was barely enough for the two of us. Or maybe by next year there will be 3 of us, Katherine said, then blushed at her own boldness. Walter stilled, a plate halfway to the shelf. He turned to look at her, his expression intense. Is that something you want, children? Eventually, yes. Do you? Katherine asked. More than anything, Walter said softly. He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. I think about it sometimes. A little boy or girl running around this house, teaching them to ride, you reading to them in the evenings. A family. Katherine rested her head against his chest. It is strange. A few months ago I could not imagine this life. Now I cannot imagine any other. January and February passed in a blur of cold and snow. Walter spent much of his time tending to the cattle, making sure they had access to food and water, checking for any that were struggling. Katherine kept the house warm and the meals ready, but she also went out when she could, helping with the easier tasks, learning more about the work of the ranch. They grew closer still, if that was possible. They learned each other's moods and habits. Walter discovered that Katherine was grumpy in the mornings before coffee. Katherine learned that Walter needed quiet time in the evenings to process his day. They had their first argument about Katherine going outside in a blizzard to check on a calf they had brought near the house. Walter worried for her safety, Katherine insisting she was capable. They made up quickly, both apologizing, both learning that marriage meant compromise. In March, Katherine realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She told Walter one evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction. Walter's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and then pure joy. He picked Katherine up and spun her around, laughing. A baby. We are going to have a baby. I think so, Katherine said, laughing with him despite her nervousness. I am not certain yet, but I think so. Walter set her down carefully as if she might break. You should see the doctor in town just to be sure, to make sure everything is all right. They made the trip to Pueblo the next week. Dr. Harrison, an older gentleman with gentle hands and a kind manner, confirmed what Katherine already suspected. She was pregnant, likely due in September or October. You are healthy and strong, Dr. Harrison assured them. There is no reason to think you will not have a normal pregnancy and delivery, but I want to see you once a month as you progress. Walter was insufferable on the ride home, treating Katherine like she was made of glass, insisting she hold his arm, practically lifting her into the wagon seat. Katherine finally had to tell him to stop fussing. I am pregnant, not dying, she said with exasperation. Women work right up until they deliver. I can still do my normal tasks. I know, Walter said, but his hand stayed protectively on her knee during the whole ride home. As spring arrived and the snow melted, revealing the prairie beneath, Katherine's belly began to swell. She felt the baby move for the first time in late May, a flutter like bird wings inside her. She grabbed Walter's hand and placed it on her stomach so he could feel it too. The wonder on his face made her fall in love with him all over again. They talked about names. Walter wanted strong, simple names. Katherine liked something a bit more traditional. They compromised, making lists and debating their merits while doing evening chores or lying in bed at night. "What if it is twins?" Katherine asked one night. Walter's eyes widened. "Twins? Do those run in your family? I have no idea. Maybe we should think of 2 names just in case." They settled on William for a boy after Walter's father. For a girl, they chose Lily, because Katherine had once mentioned loving the wild lilies that bloomed in the spring prairie. If there were twins, they would figure out the second name when the time came. Summer was busy on the ranch. Walter was up before dawn and working until after dark most days. There was hay to cut, cattle to move to summer pasture, 100 daily tasks that never ended. Katherine helped where she could, though as her pregnancy advanced, she found herself tiring more easily. But she kept the garden thriving, learning to grow vegetables they could preserve for winter. She continued improving her cooking, experimenting with new recipes from a cookbook Mrs. Patterson had lent her. Mrs. Patterson and several other women from town visited occasionally, bringing gifts for the baby and advice for Katherine. She learned about preparing baby clothes, about what to expect during delivery, about caring for a newborn. It was overwhelming but also comforting to have this community of women around her, women who had experienced what she was about to experience. "You are lucky to have Walter, Mrs. Patterson said one afternoon as they sat on the porch shelling peas. "He is a good man, kind and steady. Those qualities matter more than anything when you are raising children together." "I know," Katherine said, watching Walter in the distance as he worked on repairing a section of fence. "I did not expect to find love in this arrangement, but I did. I really did." "Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we do not expect," Mrs. Patterson said wisely. In early September, Katherine woke in the middle of the night to sharp pains in her belly. She knew immediately what was happening. She shook Walter awake. "The baby is coming," she said, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. Walter was out of bed instantly. "I will ride for Mrs. Patterson and the doctor." "There is time," Katherine said, breathing through another pain. "But yes, you should go soon." Walter dressed in record time, pausing only to kiss Katherine firmly. "You are strong. You can do this. I will be back as fast as I can." Katherine labored through the night, Mrs. Patterson at her side, coaching her through the pains that came in increasing waves. Walter returned with Dr. Harrison just after dawn. The doctor examined Katherine and declared everything was progressing normally. "First babies take their time," he said calmly. "Settle in. This could take a while yet." It was late afternoon when the baby finally arrived. Katherine had never experienced pain like this, had never pushed her body to such limits. But when Dr. Harrison placed a wriggling, squalling infant in her arms, all the pain faded into insignificance. "A boy," Dr. Harrison announced. "A healthy baby boy." Walter, who had been pacing anxiously outside, came in at Mrs. Patterson's call. He approached the bed slowly, his eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in Katherine's arms. "William," Katherine said softly, "meet your son." Walter sat carefully on the edge of the bed. With trembling hands, he touched the baby's tiny fist. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around Walter's finger, gripping with surprising strength. "Hello, William," Walter whispered. His voice was rough with emotion. "Hello, son." Katherine watched husband and son together and felt her heart expand with love so fierce it almost hurt. This, she thought, this was what she had been looking for her whole life without knowing it. Not wealth or status or society's approval, just this. Family, love, home. The next weeks passed in an exhausted blur of feeding and diaper changes and precious little sleep. William was a hungry baby, nursing frequently, crying loudly when he wanted attention. Katherine was overwhelmed and exhausted, her body still recovering from childbirth, her emotions swinging wildly from joy to tears and back again. Walter was patient through all of it. He took over most of the household chores, cooking simple meals and keeping the house running. He would hold William in the evenings, walking the floor with the baby against his shoulder, singing soft cowboy ballads until the baby settled. Katherine would watch them together, her heart full. "You are a natural father," she told Walter one night. "I am terrified I am going to break him," Walter admitted. "He is so small." "He is tougher than he looks," Katherine assured him, "just like his father." As fall arrived and William grew from a helpless newborn into a baby who could track movement with his eyes and grab at offered fingers, Katherine felt herself settling into motherhood. It was harder than anything she had ever done, but also more rewarding. Watching William discover the world, seeing Walter's face light up when the baby smiled at him, feeling the weight of her son in her arms, this was worth every moment of difficulty. Mrs. Patterson visited regularly, bringing meals and helping with chores, giving Katherine advice and reassurance. "It gets easier," she promised. "Not easy, but easier. You are doing wonderfully, Katherine." Walter hired a young man named Tom to help with the ranch work through the winter, recognizing that he needed to be around the house more to help with William. Tom was 18, eager to learn the cattle business, content to sleep in the barn and earn his keep through hard work. With Tom handling some of the daily tasks, Walter could spend more time with his family. William's first Christmas was special. He was 3 months old, just starting to interact with the world around him. Katherine made him a soft cloth ball stuffed with rags. Walter carved a set of wooden blocks. They sat together by the Christmas tree, William on a blanket on the floor, batting at the ball with increasing coordination while his parents watched with the proud fascination only new parents can muster. "This is better than I imagined," Walter said, his arm around Katherine's shoulders. "When I sent that advertisement for a wife, I hoped for companionship. I hoped for help with the ranch. But this," he gestured at their son, at their home, at Katherine, "this is so much more than I ever dreamed of." "I was so scared when I got off that stagecoach," Katherine remembered. "I thought I was making a terrible mistake. I thought I would spend the rest of my life being miserable and alone, even if I was married." "Are you miserable and alone?" Walter asked with a small smile, knowing the answer. "I am happier than I have ever been," Katherine said honestly. "I have a husband I love, a son who is healthy and beautiful, a home I am proud of. I have learned to cook and keep house and help run a ranch. I have become someone I never thought I could be." "You were always this person," Walter said softly. "You just needed the chance to become her." The years passed, marked by seasons and milestones. William learned to walk, his first stumbling steps taking him from Katherine's arms to Walter's across the kitchen floor. He learned to talk, calling Walter Papa and Katherine Mama in his sweet toddler voice. He learned to help with simple chores, collecting eggs from the henhouse Katherine had convinced Walter to build, helping scatter grain for the chickens, sitting on Walter's lap on horseback. When William was 2.5, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less nervous, more confident in her body's ability to do what needed to be done. The pregnancy was easier than the first, or perhaps she just knew what to expect. Their daughter arrived in the spring, when the prairie was covered in wild lilies just beginning to bloom. They named her Lily, as they had planned so long ago. She had Catherine's dark hair and Walter's blue-gray eyes, and her father was completely besotted from the first moment he held her. "My little flower," Walter murmured, cradling Lily against his chest. William, curious about his new sister, stood on tiptoe trying to see her face. "Baby?" William asked. "Yes, this is your sister Lily," Katherine said, stroking William's hair. "You are going to be the best big brother." William took his role seriously, helping fetch clean cloths when Lily needed changing, singing to her when she cried, always wanting to be near her. Katherine watched her children together and marveled at how much her life had changed in just 4 years. The ranch prospered. Walter's careful management and hard work paid off. The herd grew steadily. They were able to hire another hand to help Tom, then eventually a third. Walter built a proper addition to the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Katherine furnished it slowly, buying pieces in town when they could afford it, making curtains and quilts, turning the simple ranch house into a real home. She had become skilled at all the things she once could not do. Her cooking was now truly good, people requesting her recipes after church dinners. She could preserve vegetables, make cheese, bake bread that was light and fluffy. She could help birth a calf, doctor a sick chicken, mend tack. She could ride as well as any ranch hand, shoot a rifle to scare off coyotes, manage the household accounts. But more than any specific skill, Katherine had become strong. Not just physically, though the work had made her body capable in ways it never had been in Philadelphia, but mentally and emotionally strong. She faced problems head-on. She did not give up when things were difficult. She had become the kind of woman who could build a life in the wilderness, who could be a partner to a rancher, who could raise children in this hard, beautiful land. "Do you ever miss Philadelphia?" Walter asked her one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. William and Lily were playing in the yard, William teaching Lily how to make a whistle from a blade of grass. Well, trying to teach her. Lily was more interested in pulling up the grass and throwing it in the air. Katherine considered the question. "Sometimes I miss certain things, museums, theater, the library, but do I miss that life? No, I am glad I had it because it made me who I was. But I am even more glad to have this life, because it is making me who I am meant to be." Walter reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together as had become their habit. "I am glad you answered my advertisement. I am glad you took a chance on a lonely rancher you had never met." "I am glad you were patient with me," Katherine replied. "I am glad you said we would learn together every day. You kept that promise, Walter. Every single day we learned something new together." "And we will keep learning," Walter said, "for the rest of our lives." When William was 6 and Lily was 4, Katherine discovered she was pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. She was older now, nearly 30, and the pregnancy seemed to take more out of her. But Walter was attentive, taking on even more of her work, insisting she rest more. Their 2nd son arrived in the late fall, a few weeks early but healthy and strong. They named him James after Katherine's father. Walter understood this was Katherine's way of honoring the man who had made mistakes but whom she had loved, who had given her the upbringing that prepared her, in ways neither of them could have predicted, for this life. James was an easy baby, content and calm in a way his older siblings had not been. He nursed peacefully and slept through the night early. William and Lily adored him, fighting over who got to hold him and help take care of him. Life fell into a new rhythm with 3 children. The house that had once seemed empty was now full of noise and laughter and the thousand small dramas of childhood. William started lessons with Katherine, learning to read and write. Lily followed her father everywhere, determined to do everything her big brother could do. James grew from infant to toddler, sweet and gentle, the peacemaker among his siblings. The ranch continued to thrive. Walter's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread. He was able to buy more land, expanding their holdings. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, able to provide for their children and save for the future. Katherine had become a respected member of the community. She helped organize church socials and helped new mothers just as Mrs. Patterson had once helped her. She was known for her kindness, her capability, and her devotion to her family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Walter surprised Katherine by taking her to Denver for a week. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch and children together since William was born. Walter's sister had agreed to watch the children, bringing her own brood to the ranch and making it a grand adventure for all of them. Denver was unlike anything Katherine had experienced since leaving Philadelphia. The city was growing rapidly, full of new buildings and busy streets. They stayed in a hotel, ate in restaurants, attended a theatrical performance. Katherine bought new dresses and Walter got a proper suit. They felt like a young courting couple again, holding hands as they explored the city, stealing kisses in quiet moments. But by the end of the week, they were both ready to go home. The city was exciting, but it was not their life anymore. They missed the open spaces, the quiet nights, the smell of prairie grass and cattle. They missed their children desperately. "I guess we have become true ranchers," Walter said on the train ride back to Pueblo. "All I can think about is getting home and checking on the herd. I keep wondering if James is sleeping through the night for your sister, or if he is being difficult," Katherine admitted. "And whether William remembered to do his lessons, and if Lily has convinced anyone to let her ride a horse by herself yet." They laughed together, comfortable in their shared priorities, in the life they had built together. The children were overjoyed to see them return. William had grown a full inch, or so it seemed to Katherine. Lily had lost a tooth. James had learned a new word. They all talked over each other, telling their parents about the adventures they had while they were gone. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Walter and Katherine sat on their porch, looking out at the stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky. 10 years, Walter said wonderingly. "Has it really been 10 years? It has gone so quickly," Katherine said. "I remember standing in Pueblo, getting off that stagecoach, so scared I could barely breathe. I remember the first time you showed me how to light the stove. I remember telling you I had never cooked before. And I told you we would learn together every day," Walter finished. "Best decision I ever made." "What decision?" "Marrying me, choosing to face it together instead of apart, choosing to be patient, to be partners, choosing to build something with you instead of expecting you to fit into something I had already built." Walter pulled Katherine closer. "You are not the same woman who stepped off that stagecoach. No, I am not. And you are not quite the same lonely rancher who met me." Katherine smiled up at him. "We grew into who we are together." "And we are not done growing yet," Walter said. "We have a whole lifetime ahead of us still." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. William grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to be a cattleman like his father. Lily was wild and free, riding across the prairie, bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health, testing every boundary she encountered. James was the scholar, more interested in books than cattle, dreaming of perhaps becoming a teacher or doctor someday. Katherine and Walter supported each child's different nature. encouraging them to pursue their own paths while teaching them the value of hard work and family. The ranch was successful enough now that they could afford to send James to school in Denver if he wanted, to buy Lily her own horse, to begin transitioning responsibilities to William as he grew older. When William turned 18, Walter began seriously teaching him the business side of ranching. The boy, now really a young man, took to it naturally. He had Walter's quiet competence and Katherine's quick mind. Katherine watched her son becoming a man and felt pride mixed with a bittersweet awareness that her children were growing up, would soon be making their own lives. Lily, at 16, was courting a young man from a neighboring ranch. Katherine watched the courtship with amusement and sympathy, remembering her own journey to marriage. Lily's path would be different, easier in many ways. She knew this life already. She knew how to run a ranch household. She would not arrive at marriage helpless as Katherine had been. But Katherine made sure to tell her daughter, marriage is more than just knowing how to cook and clean. It is about partnership, about respect, about choosing each other every day. Make sure you choose someone who will be your partner, who will value you as an equal. James, at 14, was already talking about attending university. It would be expensive, would require sacrifice, but Katherine and Walter were determined to give him the opportunity. They had worked hard to build not just a ranch but a legacy, and part of that legacy was giving their children choices. On a warm spring evening, 23 years after Katherine had first arrived in Pueblo, she and Walter sat on their porch watching the sunset, as had become their evening ritual. Their hands were linked, weathered and work-worn but still fitting together perfectly. "You remember the first meal we cooked together?" Katherine asked suddenly. Walter laughed. "Bacon and eggs, and you broke the first egg all over the pan. I thought you would be angry. I thought you would realize what a terrible mistake you had made bringing me here." "I realized I had made the best decision of my life," Walter corrected. "Bringing you here, marrying you, building this life with you." Katherine squeezed his hand. "We have a good life, do we not?" "The best life," Walter agreed. 3 healthy children, a successful ranch, a home full of love. What more could anyone want? "Nothing," Katherine said softly. "I have everything I could possibly want." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and purple, Katherine reflected on her journey. From the frightened, helpless young woman who had stepped off that stage-coach to the capable, confident woman she was now. From a stranger in a strange land to someone who belonged, who had roots, who had purpose. She had learned to cook, yes, but she had learned so much more. She had learned that strength comes not from never struggling but from persevering through struggle. She had learned that love is not just a feeling but a choice, made new each day. She had learned that home is not a place but the people you are with, the life you build together. And she had learned that sometimes the worst circumstances, the most desperate choices, can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. She had come to Colorado running from failure and shame. She had found success and pride. She had expected at best a tolerable arrangement. She had found a deep, abiding love that had only grown stronger with time. Walter stood and pulled Katherine to her feet into his arms. He kissed her, still able to make her heart flutter after all these years. "What do you say we go inside?" he murmured. "I am not too tired if you are not." Katherine laughed, feeling young and playful despite the gray threading through her dark hair. "Not too tired at all, Mr. Jenkins." They went inside together, closing the door on the darkening prairie. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to learn and grow together. But tonight was for celebrating the life they had built, the love they shared, the partnership that had started with a simple promise. "We will learn together every day," and they had. And they would continue to do so for all the days they had left together. William took over more and more of the ranch operations as Walter approached 50. It was a gradual transition, father teaching son everything he knew about managing cattle, reading weather, dealing with buyers, caring for the land. William proved to be a natural, with his own ideas about how to improve and expand the operation. Lily married her young rancher when she was 19, and Katherine cried happy tears at the wedding, remembering her own wedding in that same small church. Lily and her husband started their own ranch just a few miles away, close enough to visit often. Within 2 years, Lily gave Katherine her first grandchild, a spirited little girl named Rose. James earned a scholarship to attend university in Denver. He studied medicine, determined to become a doctor. Katherine and Walter were immensely proud, making the long journey to Denver for his graduation. He returned to Colorado after his training and set up practice in Pueblo, where he could serve the growing community. The ranch house that had once held just Katherine and Walter now regularly overflowed with children and grandchildren. Sunday dinners became loud, chaotic affairs with 3 generations gathered around the expanded table. Katherine would cook with Lily's help and whatever grandchildren were old enough to assist, teaching them the skills she had once struggled to learn herself. "Grandmother, is it true you did not know how to cook when you married grandfather?" Rose asked one Sunday. She was 10 now, tall and curious like her mother had been. "It is absolutely true," Katherine said, checking the roast in the oven. "I had never cooked a single meal in my life." "But you are the best cook I know," Rose said, confused. "How did you learn?" "Your grandfather taught me. And I practiced, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way." Katherine smiled at the memory. "The important thing is not starting out perfect. The important thing is being willing to learn and to keep trying." "What did grandfather say when you told him you could not cook?" Katherine's smile grew. "He said then we would learn together every day, and we did." Rose considered this. "I like that, learning together." "It is a good way to approach most things in life," Katherine said. "Marriage, certainly, but also raising children, running a ranch, really anything worth doing. It is easier when you do it together." Walter came in from outside, now moving a bit slower than he once had, his hair more silver than dark. But his eyes were still that striking blue-gray, and they still lit up when he saw Katherine. "Something smells wonderful," he said, coming to stand beside her. It was still their habit, preparing meals together even though Katherine no longer needed the help. It was their time, their ritual, something that belonged just to them. "Rose has been helping me," Katherine said. "She is quite good at peeling potatoes." "Takes after her grandmother," Walter said, winking at Rose, who giggled. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Katherine and Walter sat together on their porch. It was autumn now, the air crisp and cool, the leaves on the cottonwoods turning gold. This was Katherine's favorite time of year, when the harsh heat of summer gave way to gentler weather, when the work of harvest was done and winter's demands had not yet begun. "We have built something good, have we not?" Walter said, his arm around Katherine's shoulders. "Something that will last beyond us." "We have," Katherine agreed. "William will take care of the ranch. Lily has her own family thriving. James is helping people, healing them. They are all happy and settled. We did well by them." "We did it together," Walter said, "just like we do everything." Katherine leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. 30 years of marriage. 30 years of learning together, growing together, loving each other. It had not always been easy. There had been hard times, lean years when cattle prices dropped, winters that were brutal, losses and disappointments and struggles. But there had been so much more joy than sorrow. So many evenings like this one, sitting together in contentment. So many mornings waking up beside him. So many meals cooked together, decisions made together, challenges faced together. 3 children raised, a ranch built, a life created from nothing but hope and determination and love. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Katherine asked. "When I stepped off that stage coach?" "Sometimes," Walter said. "I was so nervous. I kept thinking you would take one look at me and the town and the rough life I was offering, and you would get right back on that stage coach and leave." "I thought about it," Katherine admitted, "for about 30 seconds. But then you spoke to me, so gentle and respectful, and I thought maybe it would be all right. Maybe I could do this." "I am glad you stayed," Walter said simply. "So am I. I found everything I was looking for here. Everything I did not even know I needed." Katherine tilted her face up to look at him. "I found myself here, and I found you, and I found home." Walter kissed her, soft and sweet, a kiss that held decades of love and intimacy and partnership. When they pulled apart, Katherine saw the shine of tears in his eyes. "You gave me that too," he said. "I was so lonely before you came. I had the ranch, I had my work, but I had no one to share it with, no one to talk to at the end of the day, no one to dream with." He touched her face gently. "You made my life full, Katherine. You made it mean something." "We made it mean something," Katherine corrected. "Together." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged overhead, the vast Colorado sky stretching out forever. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Closer by, cattle lowed softly. The familiar sounds of their life, the life they had built from nothing. Years continued to pass, as years do. Walter eventually handed over full control of the ranch to William, though he still rode out most days to check on things and offer advice when asked. Katherine slowed down too, letting Lily and her daughters-in-law take over the heavy work of preserves and harvest preparations. But she still cooked, still tended her garden, still kept the house running smoothly. Grandchildren multiplied. Rose was followed by 4 more grandchildren from Lily, 3 from James, and eventually 4 from William when he married a sweet girl from town. Katherine's cup ran over with joy watching the next generation grow. She told them stories about Philadelphia, about the wild early days of the ranch, about their grandfather teaching her to cook because she had never learned. The ranch prospered under William's management. He introduced new breeding techniques, expanded into new markets, built the family legacy even stronger. Katherine and Walter watched with pride, knowing their life's work was in good hands. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. The house could not hold everyone anymore, so they set up tables outside under the cottonwood trees. There must have been 40 people there, children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren now. Katherine looked around at all these people, all these lives that had stemmed from her and Walter's union, and could barely believe it. "Speech." Someone called out and others took up the call. "Speech, tell us the story." Katherine looked at Walter, who squeezed her hand and stood, pulling her up with him. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, but he was still handsome to her, still the man who had promised to learn together every day. 40 years ago, Walter began, his voice still strong despite his age. "I was a lonely rancher with nothing but a dream and a piece of land. I advertised for a wife, not really knowing what I was looking for, just knowing I could not do it alone anymore. And 40 years ago," Katherine continued, "I was a frightened young woman running from a life that had collapsed around me. I got off a stagecoach in Pueblo, Colorado, and met a stranger I had agreed to marry based on 3 letters and a prayer. We were both taking a leap of faith," Walter said, "both hoping for the best but prepared for much less. We barely knew each other. We came from different worlds. We had to learn everything about each other, about marriage, about building a life together." The very first night I confessed I had never cooked before, Katherine said, smiling at the memory. I thought he would be furious. I thought I had deceived him by not mentioning it in my letters. Instead, I told her we would learn together every day, Walter said. And we did. We learned to cook together. We learned to run a ranch together. We learned to raise children together. We learned to love each other, which was the most important thing of all. Katherine felt tears sliding down her cheeks. This life, all of you, everything we have built, it started with choosing to learn together instead of facing things alone. It started with patience and kindness and a willingness to take a chance on something uncertain. And it grew into more than either of us could have imagined, Walter finished. He pulled Katherine close, kissing her temple. 40 years. Here is to 40 more. Everyone cheered and raised their glasses. Katherine laughed through her tears. 40 more years might be ambitious at their age, but she would take every day she could get with this man, in this life they had built together. As the celebration continued around them, Katherine and Walter slipped away for a quiet moment together. They walked hand in hand down to the creek that ran through their property, moving slowly, taking their time. The path was familiar, worn by decades of their footsteps. They sat on the bank, watching the water flow past, constant and eternal. The same creek that had been there when Walter first bought this land. The same creek their children had played in. The same creek their grandchildren now explored. I was thinking, Walter said, about that conversation we had early on, about feeling safe, about having a place in the world. Do you remember? I remember, Katherine said. I told you I did not miss the wealth, but I missed feeling like I belonged somewhere. Do you feel that now? Like you belong? Katherine looked around at the land they had worked together for 4 decades. She thought about the house full of family, the roots they had put down, the life they had created. She thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. I belong here more than I have ever belonged anywhere, she said. This is my home. You are my home. This life we built together is where I belong. Walter nodded, satisfied. Good, because you made this my home too. It was just a place before you came. You turned it into something more. You turned it into home. They sat in peaceful silence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. How many sunsets had they watched together over the years? Thousands, certainly. Each one beautiful, each one marking another day they had shared. Thank you, Katherine said suddenly. For what? For being patient with me. For not giving up on me when I did not know how to do anything. For teaching me, for learning with me, for building this life with me. Katherine turned to face him. For loving me, even when I did not think I deserved to be loved. Walter cupped her face in his weathered hands. Katherine Jenkins, you have been the greatest blessing of my life. You made me a better man. You gave me a family. You turned a lonely existence into a life worth living. If anyone should be saying thank you, it is me. Then we will both say thank you, Katherine said with a watery smile. For everything. They held each other as the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first awkward conversations, their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, every moment of joy and sorrow and love that had filled the past 40 years. Walter lived to be 78 years old. He worked the ranch almost until the end, still rising early to check on cattle, still offering wisdom to William and the grandchildren who were old enough to learn from him. He died peacefully in his sleep one winter night, Katherine beside him as she had been for 50 years. Katherine mourned him deeply, feeling his absence in every corner of the house they had shared, in every sunset watched alone, in every meal cooked without his steady presence beside her. But she did not fall apart. The strength she had built over 5 decades of frontier life, of raising children and running a ranch and facing challenges head-on, carried her through. She lived another 8 years after Walter's death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She taught anyone who wanted to learn her recipes, her techniques, the skills she had acquired so slowly and with such difficulty in those early days. She told stories about Walter, about their life together, keeping his memory alive for the generations that followed. On a warm spring afternoon, not long after her 80th birthday, Katherine sat on the porch of the ranch house and looked out over the land she and Walter had built their life on. The house had been expanded several times over the years. William and his family lived in one wing now. But this porch, the original one, was still here, still the place Katherine came to think and remember. She thought about that terrified girl who had stepped off a stagecoach so many years ago. She thought about the lonely rancher who had taken a chance on a mail-order bride. She thought about two people who had come together out of necessity and desperation and had built something beautiful from it. We will learn together every day, such a simple promise. But it had been enough, more than enough. It had been everything. Katherine closed her eyes, feeling the warm sun on her face, hearing the familiar sounds of the ranch around her. Cattle lowing, children laughing somewhere in the distance, the wind moving through the grass. Home sounds, the sounds of a life well lived. She thought she heard Walter's voice on the wind, calling her name. She smiled, opening her eyes to look out at the prairie one last time, at the land that had challenged her and changed her and made her who she was meant to be. "I am coming," she whispered. "I am coming, my love. We will be together soon." Katherine died peacefully that evening, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Walter had created. Her funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county, all these people whose lives she had touched over her 58 years in Colorado. They buried her next to Walter on a hill overlooking their ranch. Their headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of 2 people who had taken a chance on each other and built an extraordinary life from ordinary materials, hard work, and enduring love. The ranch continued on, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story Katherine and Walter had started. But those who came after never forgot the tale of the city girl who did not know how to cook, and the lonely rancher who promised to teach her, who promised they would learn together every day. It became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, a reminder that the strongest foundations are built not on what you already know but on what you are willing to learn together. That love is not just feeling but action, not just promise but daily choice. That sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. And in that ranch house in Colorado, in the kitchen where Katherine first learned to crack an egg, in the bedroom where she gave birth to her children, on the porch where she and Walter watched thousands of sunsets together, their presence lingered. Not as ghosts, but as memory, as legacy, as the love that had soaked into the very wood and stone of the place. We will learn together every day, a simple promise that had changed 2 lives and created dozens more. A promise kept through 50 years of marriage, through challenges and triumphs, through ordinary days and extraordinary moments. A promise that had turned strangers into partners, partners into lovers, and lovers into legends. The story of Katherine and Walter Jenkins became the kind of love story the Old West was built on. Not flashy or dramatic, but real and enduring. A love story about 2 imperfect people who chose each other every day, who built something lasting from nothing more than hope and determination and the willingness to learn together. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.